Well, looks like we have a lot of people here. Good afternoon, everyone. I think I know everybody that's here, but just in case, my name is Ann Dalton. I've been a mediator since 1994, and I'm very pleased to be the co-chair of the Lbaugh ADR practice section, which comprises both mediators and arbitrators. This is a CLE and also a CME for those of you that are looking for mediation credits. The CLE credit has been applied for. Because of how backed up the Florida bar is, we've not yet gotten credit, but I'm absolutely confident that we will get credit. This is being recorded. It will be put on the Lbaugh channel, YouTube channel, and available for other people to look at. So much as I would like to make jokes about our host because he and I are good friends, I'm not going to do that because it will come back to haunt me in some undoubtedly unpleasant forum. So without further ado, we are here to listen to Keith Grossman. Keith has been a mediator for a very long time. He's also a professor at FGCU and also at Southwest Florida, which we used to know as Edison Community College. He's also a practicing mediator and arbitrator, and he also has an involvement with the I almost said res
gestae.
Yeah, I don't know why. It's a Freudian slip, probably. Res gestae, and he has all kinds of credentials, none of which I can remember at the moment, but I'm going to ask him if he would be kind enough to share those with us. And so we're going to be discussing Zoom issues with Keith. Keith has done presentations on technology before for the ADR practice section, and he's always done really extraordinary ones. I've always learned stuff from Keith. And at this point, I'm going to stop talking and let Keith take it away. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Ann. I appreciate it. I'm not sure there's much more in the way of credentials to share with you that are important, but I will just expand a little bit. I am currently the managing editor for the Lee County Bar Association's Res Gestae magazine, and so I'll make a plug if at any point you are interested in writing an article for the magazine. Please feel free to get in touch with me and let me know, and then we can see if we can work something out so that you can get published in the magazine. We're always looking for interesting content, so if it's something that interests you, please let me know. I guess the only other thing that I'll add is that I am in the process of finishing getting approved as a primary trainer with the Dispute Resolution Center in order to be able to put on the certification programs in both county and family. And I look forward to being able to, in the future, have those programs and being able to share those with you as well. I am going to take a second here to share my screen. All right, can you see that okay? You're on mute, Ann, if you were talking to me.
It's perfectly fine, Keith, and visible. I would ask everyone to please mute yourself. I hear somebody's phone ringing in the background, unless you're actually asking Keith a question. Thank you.
All right, great, thank you. So my topic today is going to be what we titled, Where are the People Mediating in an Online World, Mediating Next Door or 1,000 Miles Away Using Zoom. And we all have gotten very familiar with Zoom, I'm sure. We have kind of been rushed into doing it. Some people may have had some experience with Zoom beforehand, which I did. But I certainly became much more of an expert very quickly due to the circumstances during 2020. And I decided that there were some advanced features of Zoom that might be beneficial for other mediators to be aware of. And so that is where I really wanted to kind of gear my my talk towards those more advanced ones. I did plan on this being a interactive type of discussion, and I'm happy to take questions, and I'll be seeking your thoughts and perspectives on things as I'm going through this. With the Zoom shared screen process, it's difficult to see everybody. So if you do have something you want to ask me or have something you want to add to the conversation, please just go ahead and unmute yourself and don't wait for me to call on you because I just can't see everybody. But the first thing that I wanted to talk about was just sort of some general positives and negative things to consider regarding using Zoom, and specifically using it obviously in the context of mediation. And so, as I have used Zoom and was reading more about people's um, experiences with Zoom, there's been a little bit of a debate about Zoom, using Zoom versus doing mediation live. And some people have enjoyed it more, some people less, and that sort of thing. So one of the first questions I had from things I've been reading that I was interested in getting some feedback from you all on is, have you found that nonverbal communication has been easier or harder using Zoom? Has nonverbal communication been easier or harder using Zoom? And so if anybody has a thought on that, please feel free to share.
I think it's harder in some ways, Keith. It's harder from, from a full body perspective, but in terms of watching someone's face close up, I think it's easier. How's that for a mediator answer?
That's even a lawyerly answer. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? So from the different things that I read, in addition to my own experiences, I found that a lot of mediators feel that they can see expressions and what we would call micro expressions much easier because and can be more accurate maybe in interpreting them because you're close up with the camera sort of zoomed in on the person speaking. It's more magnified, and when you are sitting live in a room together, you're not in each other's face to that extent. Of course, that would be uncomfortable to do. So a lot of people have pointed out, mediators have pointed out that they feel that they're able to see expressions better. Um, One mediator I read about said that he is able to focus more clearly on people's mouths. And he feels that that's the most important thing because he can really feel the emotions and see the emotions by focusing on that area of the face, even when the person is trying to disguise or hide the emotions that they're feeling. Another mediator I read about said that just in general, seeing somebody from the neck up has been very beneficial in really being able to understand those nonverbal expressions, and can get a lot of clues that way. So that I thought was one interesting aspect of a difference between Zoom and having a live mediation. Another question that I know has come up in discussions I've been involved in, and I did a little reading about, was handling participants who are attending Zoom, but by phone. So they're not logging in on their computer, they're logging in through their phone, which typically, and I'm not talking about the Zoom app, I'm talking about that they're calling in using the Zoom phone number. So you're not getting the video camera. And the best practices tip that I believe from my experience and what I've read is that we really should be requiring everybody who's participating to be participating using a video camera. In mediation, we've got the questions about confidentiality and making sure nobody else is there with them in the room, and understanding their facial expressions, as I just mentioned. These, I think, are all important factors that we really should be requiring our participants to be using a video camera and not calling in using the phone number. So I think that's a best practices tip to keep in mind. I don't know if anybody has a different experience or a different thought that they wish to share on that, but I'm happy to give you a moment to do that if you'd like.
I
Okay.
think you really nailed it, Keith. I mean, I have those same concerns, and the only way I can deal with it is to periodically reiterate. Remember, nobody else on this call, and best we could do.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So the third, just general point to consider that I wanted to also ask you about is, based on your experiences so far, do you believe that the participants in mediation are feeling more comfortable or able to concentrate more by not being in the same room? So in mediation, sometimes we deal with a situation where the relationship of the parties prior to our being involved with them has led to certain dynamics where maybe some power and control issues, and there's a feeling of uncomfortableness for them to be in the same room. So are you experiencing that they're happier to be basically in separate locations far apart from each other by using Zoom than having to be in the same location, the same mediation room? Um, Anybody have any particular experience that they have found in their mediations with that sort of situation? Okay. All right. So let me then go to that idea about situations that may arise by not being in the same room. And is there complications with that? Is it leveling the playing field, so to speak? And how is that all playing out? So one of the things that a lot of mediators feel is that there is an ability to have more of a level playing field in the Zoom process because we are all basically the same size. We're in the same size box, and so there's not those dynamics of feeling smaller than somebody else when you're live together in the room. So you're in the same size box on your computer screen. You're possibly in an environment that's very comfortable for you, as opposed to having to go to a downtown location in the mediation office and that sort of thing. And so they may feel a lot of comfort in the location, their chosen location, rather than having to go to whatever the designated location is. They may feel that there's problems because they're not in the same room as their attorney. Some attorneys are joining Zoom with their clients in the same room together, but other attorneys are maintaining that separate aspect, and they're in their office or whatever, and the client is wherever they are in their home. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect maybe there because their attorney's not sitting next to them, and it may depend on the type of case that where that's playing out. So in family law, it may be more critically important that they're in the room together for the client. Being comforted by the attorney than maybe in some other type of civil litigation where they don't have that same type of pre-existing relationship with the other side, the other party. Um, but generally speaking, it feels like Zoom has brought more equality to the participants than when they were in the same room together. And I think that those things that I just highlighted, the feeling of more equality, being more comfortable in the location where they are coming in from on Zoom, that it is allowing people to take more of an active role in their mediations where they may feel intimidated and be more quiet in an environment where everybody is in the same room together live. They're potentially able to take more of an active role in their mediation in this environment. So we're seeing a little bit more of that, I would say, in regards to the way people are feeling in the Zoom conference. Um, before I move on to another topic, anybody have any thoughts about the distance that Zoom provides being a positive or negative? Is it leveling the playing field? Is it causing more problems than when we were live? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think in some ways, Keith, I think having it in person emphasizes the importance of the mediation to people. I think in some ways it's counterbalanced by the convenience of being at home. But I'm always concerned that when there's a caucus, the party who's not talking to the mediator is running out and talking to the kids or the spouse or in a construction or some other type of thing, some other party. And it's just not a level of comfort for me.
Yeah, and I think that that's a legitimate concern because it is easier, I would say, to get more distracted and try to multitask and that sort of thing when you're on Zoom, and so it's a less controlled environment in that way. I would say though that one of the things that even for live mediations that we have run into that is very difficult to control, that is similar to the situation Ann just brought up, is that we have the ability to text. And I've been in situations in mediation where I've caught the participants texting, while I'm there in the same room with them. Certainly, I'm anticipating that there's probably some of that going on when we're in caucus and I'm not in the room with them. But I've found situations where they're even, texting while I'm sitting there, and so there has to be some um, recognition of that and addressing what does that mean for the mediation, and how as the mediator should we be handling it. I know, most of the mediations that I do are family law, and I know that there's been a handful of mediations where it's come out that the spouses, the soon-to-be ex-spouses, are in separate rooms and they're texting with each other while the mediation proceedings are going on. And sometimes it's a positive thing because they're sharing information with each other that's moving closer to resolution, or whatever. But other times it's been them threatening each other, and of course that's not a positive thing, so we have to deal with that. So I think there's now, with the ability to text and the freedom that people feel with the texting, that even in live mediations we're dealing with that. So it is an issue in Zoom, but it is also now an issue in live mediations as well, I would say. Anybody else have any other thoughts that they want to share on that? Okay, so let me move on to the topic of technology, and how Zoom, some of these are Zoom related, Zoom specific things, and some are features that kind of come into play when we're dealing with these online platforms, video platforms. So one of the things is that Zoom, you may recall that when everybody was now rushing to use Zoom at the beginning or towards the beginning of 2020, that there were a lot of questions about security with Zoom, and about whether people could access the Zoom that were uninvited, and that people were having meetings, and that experience was happening where somebody who was uninvited came in and disrupted the meeting. I have been on Zoom multiple days during a week, many, just about every week, since really before 2020. I was using Zoom in 2019. I've been on a lot of Zooms, I've been on a lot of meetings. I finally had that experience for the first time in December, beginning of December. I was on it was more of a kind of end of the year happy hour for an organization that I'm involved in. And so I think there was a little bit of a lax attitude in regards to putting out in the public the Zoom code in order to get in. And not everybody in the organization knows each other by name, by face. So somebody showed up and nobody really realized that they were uninvited, and all of a sudden they disrupted the meeting, and the host was able to quickly get them out. But I'd never had that experience until that one. But I've heard other people talk about it. But one of the other things that one of the other questions in terms of security that came up was whether the encryption in Zoom was of the necessary level in order to have these types of confidential conversations and share secure information, etc. So when you set up a Zoom meeting, there is a way in order to make sure that you're having what's called end-to-end encryption. And that's really, in order to have the maximum level of security with the encryption, that's really what you want, is to have end-to-end encryption. There's a way to make sure that you've got it turned on when you're setting up your Zoom meetings. It's a little bit challenging and difficult for me to really show that to you in this environment. But I do have an article that if you want to have me email it to you, I'm happy to do that. When I get to the end of this program, I'll share my email address, and you can go ahead and email me, and I'll go ahead and send you that article because it explains much further about the importance of that and how to go about doing that. So I'm happy to share that with you. Some other features to think about when you are doing a Zoom meeting or a Zoom mediation is to think about your sound. Are people able to hear you? Are you too low? Are you too high? So testing that out beforehand and knowing. And also having some dialogue with the participants to the mediation to make sure their audio is working correctly as well. I did a mediation either yesterday or 2 days ago. I think the person first, when they logged in, I think they were trying to use the microphone that was built into their laptop, and it was just horrible. It was really hard to hear them, and so we were going to. So my backup plan was that I was going to have them stay in the Zoom meeting on video, but I was going to have them also call in by phone into the phone number so that we could use their phone for the audio. Fortunately, they did have a different headset, or a headset, I should say, and they were able to plug that in, and it worked perfectly. So we were able to resolve it that way. But having a backup plan for those kinds of things, and to some extent, it may be necessary really to have some discussion, some guidance about that with participants to mediation before the actual day of mediation, because they may not have as much familiarity or any familiarity with Zoom, and so giving them an opportunity to do what I'll call a dry run and test these things out can be important to do. Another thing is their environment. Is there enough light where they are? Is there too much light behind them so you can't really see them? They're basically in a shadow. How is the angle of their camera? Is it uncomfortable essentially to kind of look at them the way they have their camera set up? So those types of things can be important. So you want to set a good example. So you want to make sure that you've handled all those things on your end as well. One of the things that we probably have all run into using Zoom is the question of whether to use for our background a natural environment or to use a virtual background. I have had some meetings that are on Google Meeting platform. And one of the things that they have there that's not on Zoom, that I hope Zoom someday brings in, which is nice, is that you can keep your natural background, but you can blur it. And so they have two features: partial blur and full blur. And so what your background is really just your office, but it is blurred so it's not distracting. But it's not a virtual background that can be something that is distracting or inappropriate. So sometimes I get into situations where somebody's using that type of virtual background, and it's just not really working great. In mediation specifically, I think that you have to ask them to turn off their virtual background because you need to be certain that there's not somebody else in the room with them if they're supposed to be alone. And the virtual background prevents you from being able to see their surroundings. And so asking them to turn off the virtual background so that you can monitor that in your role as the mediator, I think is important thing to do. Um, Also, you may run into a situation where somebody is participating in the mediation and they're not really in a designated closed off space. They're in an open area and there's people walking through and and those sort of things. So you have to address that with them as well, so that confidential information isn't being shared inappropriately, that they're not getting interrupted, you're not getting distracted, and those types of things. So thinking about that for yourself as well as discussing it with the participants to the mediation, I think is an important thing to do. Anybody have any particular situations where they had to deal with somebody with a virtual background that became a problem? Anybody have that type of situation? Okay. Um, when you get onto Zoom, you have the ability at the very beginning, there's a little menu there where you can test your audio and your video prior to the meeting. So you can speak into your microphone and it'll give you the um, response back so you can hear how it sounds. I got on this morning and Anne was on before we started letting people in, and she mentioned to me that there was a little issue with my microphone, so I was able to get to that menu and repair it, and I'm assuming it's working out fine. But testing those things beforehand, I think, is a good thing to put on your checklist to do. Um, Communicating these things to the participants to mediation before the day of mediation, I think is a good policy. So letting them know that they're going to need to have video and audio, recommending that they test it beforehand, um, making sure that they have good Wi-Fi, reminding them of the importance of that, and that they should be in a location where there's not going to be other people, there's not going to be background noise, those sort of things. um, when I get a person who's going to be attending mediation with me who expresses some concern or reservation about Zoom because they're not familiar with it, I offer to spend 15 minutes with them beforehand, not the same day, but a day before, to just run them through it and get them comfortable, and give them that experience so that it's not the first time that they're doing it for the mediation. So I offer to do that kind of dress rehearsal or a mock meeting with them type of thing, to increase their confidence in a procedure that is unfamiliar to them. Um, when you have a mediation participant who is attending using their smartphone, being on Zoom constantly for a few hours tends to drain batteries. So I recommend to them that they make sure that they're plugged in, so that they're not draining the battery on their phone, and they don't run out of juice and have to get off the mediation because of that reason. Always have backup communication tools in case of an emergency. Your internet may go down, their internet may go down. So there's always a reason to have possible reason to have a backup. So I have a telephone conference call number that I use for just having conference calls in general, and so I always have that available as a backup plan. I also think it's a good policy to, at the beginning of the mediation or prior to the mediation, to get people's cell phone numbers and give them your cell phone number. So if you need to text each other because something happened, they got kicked out or whatever it may be, you've got that as an alternative way to communicate temporarily, just to handle any sort of emergencies that may arise. Um, the other thing that a lot of times I wind up running into is not having my technology available to me in the way I want it available to me at the time that I'm doing a Zoom mediation. So for example, right now I'm presenting and I'm speaking, and so I've got a monitor. I have two monitors on my office desk, and so I've got the window with your videos in one. I've got my PowerPoint in another monitor, and then where are my notes? Well, I've got my iPad set up for my notes, the things that I wanted to talk about. But if I wanted to take notes, if I was in a mediation and I wanted to take notes during the mediation, which of course we all do, if my computer is set up to be doing the Zoom, it may not be convenient to be also typing notes while I'm on Zoom. So for me, I use my iPad and I have a note-taking app on my iPad for the purpose of taking notes there. I like to do everything electronically, so that's the way I do it. But if you don't like to do it that way, having your legal pad available and that sort of thing. But I know that there are some mediators that like to type their notes, and it makes it a lot more challenging when you're on Zoom. So thinking about different ways to make sure you're able to take accurate notes and keep up with that when your technology is geared towards the Zoom program is something that can be important to do. So those are my overall thoughts in regards to technology. Any other thoughts or questions regarding technology before I move on to another topic?
Have you had any experience, Keith, with the other uh, technological programs such as something through Microsoft?
Um, I have had a little bit of experience with other platforms. Prior to Zoom, I was using the Google. At that time they called it the Google Hangouts. I was using that platform a lot. That one had a lot of nice features, and there was a lot of stability to that. So I like that. I've been using in the past GoToMeeting and those kinds of things. So I have experience with the different ones. Um, Most recently, though, I've really stuck with Zoom. One of the groups that I'm involved with that I have a meeting with regularly, we're using the Google Meetings platform that I mentioned earlier. And that seems to be a nice one to use also. Zoom for me just seems to have been the one that is more convenient, the one I've become most comfortable with, and I find that's the one now that most people are familiar with for these types of like for mediations or these types of meetings. And so I've just really stuck with that. But there are different features that the other platforms have that may be important for a particular reason, or you may be more comfortable with, or that sort of thing. Like I said, at the beginning of the pandemic, when people were first starting to use Zoom, there were a lot of concerns about security. And so there was recommendations to use the other platforms, some of the other platforms that were perceived as being more secure. And so some people were doing that. I didn't really do that. I just learned how to make Zoom as secure as I could make it. Any other questions or comments in regards to technology?
Microsoft Teams I've used. I'm sorry, this is Chris. Um,
Hey, Chris.
and it's a little tougher to use. It's got more security features, but the Army and the Department of Defense insist upon it. They don't want you using Zoom or Google.
Because of the security?
Yes, I don't think it makes a difference, but that's what they want to do. It's just a little tougher to log into and a little tougher to use at times. I'd much rather use Zoom.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really like about Zoom, especially when you think about the people who are going to be participating in mediation have a variety of levels of technology experience, technology confidence, and I feel like Zoom is really just has the most user-friendly experience. And so when I'm mediating with people who really do not use these platforms very well, I think, or frequently, I think Zoom provides the best user experience for them. That's been my feeling. Any other thoughts? Thanks, Chris. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay. Let me talk a little bit then about building relationships, because I do think that we do have some questions about whether we're able to really build rapport and build a relationship with the folks who are participating in mediation when we're not all in the same room together. When we're at a live mediation, in the same location, obviously you've got the ability to greet everybody and have your little small talk and say hello and get coffee and give a big box of donuts and all those kinds of things that make people comfortable and make them happy, and all that kind of stuff. It's a little bit more challenging, maybe in this online platform. And so what are the things that we can do to really improve upon that? So I mentioned earlier about the idea of having some communications with them before the day of the mediation, specifically regarding technology and making sure that they've got their audio and their video and Wi-Fi is good and all those sort of things. But I think that pre-mediation communication is also important for starting the process of building the rapport. So like I said, I offer the opportunity to do a little dress rehearsal using Zoom for people who are uncomfortable with it. Well, one of the other benefits of doing something like that is they have the ability to see me before mediation and be able to have a dialogue with me and that sort of thing. And so they can be more comfortable on the day of mediation because that introduction has really occurred. And so I'm willing to do that, even if somebody wants to just kind of touch base with me, where maybe I would have in the past had a phone call with them because they wanted to share some information with me prior to the day of mediation, which is allowed. Maybe we'll do it by Zoom instead. So we're getting that visual, we're getting the technology experience together, building that comfort level and that sort of thing. So a pre-mediation communication in that type of way can be very helpful. I just a couple of months ago, I started using for a few different purposes through my primarily more really on the law side of my practice, but thinking about ways to incorporate it as a pre-mediation communication for my mediations. I started subscribing to a software platform called BombBomb, BOMB. And what BombBomb allows you to do is to create videos that you can then insert into your email that you're sending to somebody. And so rather than writing out long text, I can just videotape myself speaking about something that is relevant to that email, and they can go and they can click on it and see me speaking. And so somebody who I've never met before can get a feeling for who I am by actually hearing me and seeing me, rather than just reading what I have written down in an email. This particular program has become very popular, the BombBomb program, for the purpose of sales, and so it's very popular with people who are in a sales profession. But it is a great way to give some beginning of an introduction to who you are, what you look like, how you sound. And so what I'm thinking about, what you can with BombBomb, you can create the video, and then it is located online at the BombBomb website. And anytime I want to send that same video to anyone, all I have to do is just copy the link and put it into the email. So I can create a welcome video for my mediation clients, and then I can send it to them prior to the day of mediation, after they have started the process of hiring me, to make them more comfortable, with that type of approach as well. Um, during the mediation, I mentioned before about making sure you communicate with them beforehand about being in a location where there's not a lot of background noise and those sort of things. The other things that I think to start really setting the platform for the mediation being positive is to also ask them to not multitask during the mediation, to not take unrelated phone calls, and those sort of things. And setting that groundwork before the day of mediation. So having that kind of dialogue with them beforehand, which makes it easier to then be able to engage with them during the mediation. So when you invite, I think about it, I read this somewhere, I think about it in terms of when you invite somebody into your house to share a meal with you, you're going to set the table, and you're going to present a nice table to sit out for you to share a meal. And it's the same idea for mediation. What are the things that you can do beforehand to set the table so that when they arrive at mediation, they're already very comfortable, they already know what to expect. You also may need to make sure, or you should make sure, you need to really be aware whether they might be calling in via Zoom from a different time zone. When you are scheduling, it may come up, or just being aware after it's been scheduled and you get started and not realizing that the person is ahead of us and they're kind of exhausted and ready to go to sleep because you're doing an afternoon mediation. Something like that might be a factor that you really need to be aware of. So giving that some thought, and making sure that they're comfortable in the time zone where they're located, because when we're all together in the same room, obviously we're not thinking about that, we're in the same time zone. But Zoom now opens this opportunity where we could be on the other side of the world. So that might be something that you really need to think about when you're scheduling, and knowing what their ability to be present and be engaged at the mediation is going to be. From a technology standpoint, when setting up the meeting, the way Zoom is set up, you may or may not know this already, but you are together right now with me in the main session, and any of us, unless the meeting is set up differently, but if it's basically set up to the typical default method, any of us can chat with each other in the Zoom chat feature, so directly from one participant to another. You can change that so that they can't do that. The participants can only chat with you as the host. When you go into the breakout rooms, they can only chat with the people that are in the breakout room with them. So the chat feature changes so that they can't just chat with anybody else who's participating in the overall meeting. They can only chat with the people in the breakout room. Again, you can set that so that they're only able to chat with you as the host, and not chatting with each other. So that's something that you can configure when you're setting up the meeting. Also, how are you going to handle, when you're in the breakout rooms, how are you going to handle their ability to just return to the main session without your permission? Do you want to allow them the ability to do that, or do you want to control that so that they can't leave the breakout room without your basically giving them permission to do that? So you can set that up as well. And that might be important because you may wind up in the, you're going back and forth between the breakout rooms, but maybe you wind up in the main session room with one of the attorneys or something, and then somebody from a different breakout room, not that attorney's client, also winds up in the main session unexpectedly, and now you're in the midst of a conversation that they've heard at least part of. So controlling that can be important in a mediation setting. One of the universal questions for mediation in general is, do you start in a joint session or do you start in breakout rooms in caucus? Part of the answer to that question seems to be the culture of where you do most of your mediations. So my experience in Lee County with family law cases is that we typically start out in joint session. My experience in Collier County with family law cases is that they typically like to start out in caucus and basically stay in caucus the whole time. But that question comes into play in the Zoom environment as well. Just to give some context for me personally, I always like to start in joint sessions, both live and on Zoom. I don't like the idea of immediately putting parties in separate rooms. And I think in the Zoom environment, it's even the reasons why I think are even more important. If you get somebody who is sitting by themselves, so they're not even in a public area, they're not sitting in the same room as their attorney, and you've put them into a separate room, I think that there are some concerns about that they're not expressing their thoughts. It's all just contained within them, and they're just getting upset and angrier because they're allowing themselves, the angst of the whole situation is now upon them, and they're just letting it all filter within themselves, and I don't think that's a good idea. And so I like having them start out in joint sessions so that that's not happening. The other thing is that I feel like putting people into separate rooms reinforces them to some negative ideas that are not good. One is that I think we're telling them that they don't need to care about what the other side thinks, and the other side doesn't need to care about what they think, because we're not giving them that opportunity to share some thoughts with each other when we put them in separate rooms. I think we're also telling them that they're not going to hear anything important from the other person. They're Everything that they would hear, they already know, or it would not be important for them. So I think it's sending that kind of message to them. Um, as a mediator, I think it's important for them to get some insight as to what the other person is thinking, what their thought process is, what their perspective is. And by putting them immediately in separate rooms, I think we're sending a message that none of that stuff is important. The other person's perspective or their thought process is not important to the mediation process. And I think that's the wrong message to send. And basically, we're saying to them that your one-sided view is really the only thing that's important. So I think those are sort of the underlying messages that we're sending to people when we're putting them in separate rooms. And I think it might even be a stronger message, negative message, when we're doing it in the Zoom environment than it is when we are all live together in the same location. Um, I think the joint sessions allow me to build rapport with both of them together in the same room. There's an ability to be able to show that I can talk with both of them with equal amount of respect, and I'm not favoring one over the other. I'm displaying that behavior in front of both of them. And I think that's important to develop that rapport and to develop trust with them. Um, and I personally think that it is important to allow them to, so-called vent, to articulate what they're thinking in front of the other person, knowing that there's a very strong possibility that they're going to say things that are going to make the other person unhappy, maybe even set them off. But I think a lot of people come to mediation and they perceive this as their day in court, that this is their opportunity to really say what they want to say when they have not felt they've had the ability to say it previously. And the conflict that may arise, the anger and those kind of elevated emotions, um, does not bother me. I've talked with other mediators and they're very uncomfortable with that. They don't want that to happen. They want to keep them separate so there's nothing said that would really set off anybody. And I think that they have to have the opportunity to get that out and to feel like they said what they needed to say, had their moment in court to testify, the way they interpret that. And so I like the joint session for that as well. And I think these things are even more important in a Zoom environment because there's already that detachment due to the distance of location, due to the technology that they have to use to be able to participate, and those sort of things. So that's my feeling about how to handle the mediation at the beginning, and then when to and then you figure out when to go to the breakout room. And I explained to them the process of how the breakout room is going to work, and I'll run through that in a second as far as how I look at doing that. Some other things to consider, though, in terms of keeping those relationships in good form. Think about, before the mediation starts, timing of breaks, and scheduling them the best you can to the extent that you can. Um, how are you going to handle breaks so that people are comfortable logging off of Zoom and not feeling like they're missing an important conversation, or they're not missing when you come back to the breakout room to talk to them? So having a sense beforehand of how to do that, because these people are not. There's a bit of a restriction when you're together live. I find that participants are a little bit more comfortable saying, hey, can we take a quick break? I got to go run to the bathroom, or standing up and stretching while we're talking, or just shifting to a different seat in the room. Those things are restricted to us when we're in a Zoom environment. So we have to give them the ability to do that. They're not necessarily going to ask. So we have to provide it for them. And I think scheduling that beforehand, not a tight schedule, but just an idea of when you're going to do that, I think can be important. Also, how are you going to handle lunch? When we're live in mediation together, if we're doing a mediation that's long enough that it's going to be during the lunch hour, many times we wind up just ordering in lunch and we're all sitting around a table together, maybe in separate breakout rooms, maybe we're still in the main joint session, but it's a lot more easier. The flow is easier, and so how are we going to handle that in a Zoom environment? The best practice that I think has worked from my experience doing mediations through lunch hour, which I typically don't do. I try to schedule half day either before lunch or after lunch, but I've had a few where we've done it during lunch. And from the things that I've read about other mediators' experiences, is to give them an opportunity to really say, this is the lunch period. So maybe a half an hour, and they feel comfortable that they can get up, they can turn their video camera off, they can go and they can eat lunch. People are not comfortable typically sitting in front of a video camera with other people watching them eating their food. So giving them the opportunity to get away from the camera and really have a designated lunchtime where they know they're not going to be expected to be on camera can really be helpful. So that is, I think, a best practice for lunch, is to designating that time that this is our lunch time, and you can get off camera and go eat your lunch. Um, Another thing that you can do on Zoom, which you may not realize that you can do, is to click on what's called, it's to click on what's titled hide self view. So if you go to the your little frame on your screen, um, and there's the three dots next to where it says mute, you click on that, there's a little drop down menu and it says hide self view. I like to use that feature so that I'm not distracted about whatever's going on in my environment. I'm not worried about, my hair, anything like that. So you can do that. You can turn off the self view so you're only looking at the participants in mediation. The other thing that um, I kind of stumbled upon, but this is the idea of that at the end of the mediation, um, I had the tendency to basically say, okay, the meeting is over, and I'm the host, so I control the button that says end meeting for all. And I did that in a mediation, not really giving it much thought. And I realized that as I was ending it, I had this sense that maybe the attorney and the client were still interested in talking with each other, but they're not in the same location. So their form of communication at the moment is the Zoom meeting that I'm in control of. And now I've just ended it. And so and then just I had that thought, and in my reading shortly after that, I just probably had read it before and gave it no thought, but then I read something that came to me as I had been thinking about this, that it's good form to leave the meeting open even though I'm no longer participating, but to leave the meeting open for as long as necessary for the participants to continue talking with each other. So typically the scenario is going to be the attorney and the client are in a breakout room together, and I'm just going to turn off my camera, I'm going to turn off my microphone, and I'm going to let them know that I'm leaving the meeting open so that they can continue talking with each other. To just stop the meeting and basically not allow them an opportunity, it seems like it's basically just saying when somebody's in your home or your office, okay, I'm done with you, get out. And a good host doesn't do that. So giving them the opportunity to have that discussion, I think, is important. All right, so let me go through a couple of quick things in terms of using breakout rooms a little bit more than what I've already touched upon. I think naming the rooms is important because it helps with me to identify who's going to be in which room. I do this before the meeting starts, before the mediation starts, and I use the names of the client. That's how I do it. I think that's the best way for me to do it. So I like to name the rooms, breakout rooms based on the name of the client that's going to be in that room. And I think it's good for them because they see their name, they know it's their designated space. I think psychologically that helps them. I assign, as soon as I start the meeting and everybody has logged in, as close to the beginning of it, I assign them to their mediation room. I wish that we could do it, their breakout room. I wish that we could do it before they actually log into the Zoom meeting, so I didn't have to worry about it. But you can't do it until you actually have people logged into the meeting. So I like to do it as soon as possible and get that out of the way. Um, so, so this is just a quick view. When you're setting up the meeting, you're gonna have boxes to check and stuff. So in this particular case, this is where you can create the breakout rooms when you're setting up the meeting and naming them by their clients' names. Like I said, I do it. And then this is where you can, under this options one in the breakout room, check off whether they can return to the main session at any time. Okay, so basically every mediation is going to start off with a main room, breakout room one and breakout room number two. I suggest that you create another breakout room. So if you wanted to meet with just the attorneys separately together, you have a room to go to where you can go into and it's just you and the two attorneys. I also think that you might want to have a room just for yourself. So you may want to go into that room where you're not going to get distracted. Nobody's going to show up unexpectedly because you just need a 5-minute break, or you need to check something in your notes, or you want to start drafting without them looking at you, those sort of things. So then when you start the meeting, you're all going to start off in the main room, and then you're going to move them into their breakout rooms. And it's very easy to do once you have it set up correctly. There's also a feature for using a whiteboard in Zoom. So you may want to capture notes that you want to share with them. So for like if you were in a live location and you had a a whiteboard available to you and you wanted to write on it for things that they've said or the important points that they've made or what their goals are, you can do the same thing in Zoom. There's a whiteboard feature where you can do that. And if you're doing it on a digital device, an iPad or whatever, you can use your Apple Pencil. If you're doing it on the computer, you can use your mouse, and you also can use your keyboard to type it instead of handwrite it. Also, I've never spent a lot of time doing this, but I have on a couple occasions. I've been able to share my iPhone or iPad. Also, in the shared screen function is where these options are available to you. So my computer is able to locate my iPad, and then I can have notes that are on my iPad that I want to share with the participants, and I can do that right from that device. There is a handbook that the DRC office put out where it says that when you're sending them to the breakout room, and I changed it a little bit, but I adopted it more for my needs, but to say to the people when you're sending them to the breakout room, something along the lines of, it is quite common in mediation for me to spend some time talking with each of you separately. I'm going to start with whichever party, and I'm going to have you go to and name the breakout room where we can only hear and see each other. I think it's important for them to know that that's a private area. I'm going to, now turning to the other party, I'm going to have you go to the name of the breakout room. If either one of you need anything during this time while I'm not in the room, this is the method for contacting me, whatever it is that you've decided to set up. And while I'm in the other room talking to the other party, feel free to take a short stretch break, and then I'll be in your room with you. So something along those lines, I think, is really the great way to send them to their breakout rooms. Another question comes up when we're doing a live mediation and we're going back and forth between the rooms. We have the ability to knock on the door to let them know we're about to enter the room. We don't have that in Zoom. Zoom doesn't really have a great feature. The two features that seem to be the best to use are, there is a broadcast feature where you can broadcast to everybody in the breakout rooms a message telling them you're about to come in, or if you've gotten their cell phone numbers in order to text them, like I spoke about earlier, you can text them to let them know that you're about to enter their room. So these are the kind of the fast tips that I have for you. We're basically at the end of our hour, and I'm going to, this is my email address. So if you have anything that you want me to email to you, some resources that I have based on the stuff I talked about, feel free to email me at keith@attorneygrossman.com. Any other questions or anything that you're thinking about, let me know. And as I said, if you have some thoughts for an article for Race Just I, you can email me there as well.
Thank you, Keith. This has been incredibly wonderful. As usual, I learned a lot from your presentation, even though I do a lot of Zoom, so thank you. I do want to very quickly remind everyone this is being recorded. If you would like to view it again, it will be on the YouTube channel for the Lee County Bar Association. Thank you, Lbaugh, for setting that up and implementing that. And our next session will be on January 27th, which is a Wednesday. And it will be in conjunction with the business law practice section, and it will be Denise Wheeler-Wright doing a presentation on cultural diversity issues in mediating business disputes. I know we all have a challenge in getting our cultural diversity credits, so Denise has very kindly stepped up to the plate to offer that as an extra added bonus. So our next one will be January 27th, which is a Wednesday. If you're not on the email list, send me an email, and I'll put you on our email notification list. There is no cost to join the ADR practice session or to get these emails. So once again, thank you, Keith. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Ann.
Thank
Wonderful.
you. And at this point, it's 1:01, so we're going to stop the recording, and I am going to invite you all to leave my living room.
You're kicking us out.